Hi, it's December 21st, it's Saturday, and I'm Mobile Max. And you're wondering what's going on with Mr. Musk and Donald Trump demanding that the Congress increase the debt ceiling. What's this got to do with me? Well, that's because raising the debt ceiling is the transparent and honest way for the government to borrow money to pay its obligations, like FEMA, emergency help for those people back east who were hit by the hurricane storms, or paying Social Security benefits, or paying military salaries, or buying airplanes and tanks. You got the idea. The government needs to borrow money in order to pay its obligations, whatever they may be. Well, the debt ceiling is how much you, the people of the United States now and in the future, owe to pay this debt. We borrowed this amount of money and we have to pay this amount of interest, just like any other debt obligation security, like your mortgage. You pay interest plus the principal every month. The government has to do the same thing. It issues government securities to borrow money. That's one of the ways the government, but there's other ways for the government to get money without raising the debt ceiling, which is the honest and open way. And you want the honest and open way because that shows how much the figure is. And then other people may say, well, instead of raising the debt, why don't you just cut spending? But since 2008 and the mortgage security meltdown, the government has become very covert about raising money and inserting it into the economy. One of these phrases you might have heard of before is called quantitative easing. That's one of the main federal government agencies that handle the money and interest rates. The Federal Reserve basically prints out money and buys corporate and government securities, borrowing instruments, and injects a bunch of money into the economy. It's all borrowed money, but it's not announced. There's no figure, there's no national debt. Anyway, as time has gone on in this country, the national debt and borrowing has become more convoluted. It used to be in this country hundreds of years ago, the actual paper money, instead of now, you'll see it says Federal Reserve Note. Right here. Federal Reserve Note. That's the goodwill of the United States saying that this money is good because we're the United States of America and we're the most powerful country in the world. So we say goes, basically. But in the past, they used to have actual silver or gold that backed the money up, and the money would, instead of saying Federal Reserve Note, would say gold certificate, or later on it would say silver certificate, because they had gold or silver in Fort Knox or whatever to back up the paper money. But as things have gone on, in 2008 we had a mortgage meltdown. You remember, people bought homes that they couldn't afford, and home builders wanted to sell these homes that they built all over the place. So they basically sold them to anybody, whether they could afford it or not. And as they do now, they turned these mortgages into securities that other people could buy and sell. Well, unfortunately, in 2008, they had what they called a mortgage meltdown, because they had some kind of formula that said that, well, we know a lot of these mortgages are are backed up by borrowers who can't afford it. But if we take the top 10%, they had some kind of formula to ensure that these mortgage securities were valid and good. But the formula was bullshit. And in 2008, all of a sudden they found out that all these securities were not worth as much as they were bought for, and they crashed. And a lot of banks and rich people were going to lose a bunch of money, and the economy was going to go into recession. So what they did, and this was this Treasury Secretary under Bush called Timothy Geithner, he brought quantitative easing, where the Federal Reserve bought corporate and government bonds and all sorts of securities and injected money into the country. But there's no debt ceiling for that. That's kind of covert, and you got to dig around to get the figures for that, because that's basically just printing out money. And you say, well, what this got to do with me? Well, money is just like any other service or good. It has to obey the laws of supply and demand. Well, what does that mean? That means, like, I'm a mechanic, and if I'm the only one in Los Angeles, well, my value goes way up because people need to have their car fixed. And if I'm the only one, I can charge extravagant prices because I have a bunch of demand. There's so much demand out there. But if I increase my supply of mechanics and all of a sudden there's no more one, there's 1 million mechanics, well, then my value goes down. And money's the same thing. The money supply, the more of it, the value goes down. And since money represents goods and services, well, if the value of the money goes down, the comparable goods and services go way up. Like a house. It used to be the American dream to buy a house. And then your family's security would be guaranteed because you could always borrow money on the house. And since inflation was a fact of life, your house would protect you from inflation. And as inflation went up, your value of your house would go up. So you were protected and you had a nest egg. And this was the American dream. But in Los Angeles, most people can't afford a house anymore. They're so expensive because the money supply. The money supply, oops, that was a mistake. The money supply went way up. And the comparable goods and services that the money represents went way up in value because they pumped so much of the money into the economy during quantitative easing. Well, Mr. Musk and Donald Trump want honest borrowing and spending. They want to announce, this is how much money we need, and this is how much we have to borrow, and how are we going to account for this? Are we going to cut spending, or are we going to increase borrowing? It brings it out into the open. It's the honest way of doing things. Instead of taking the money covertly and pumping up the money supply and creating massive inflation and destroying the American dream. And that's what's happened with all this quantitative easing. It's pumped up the money supply, and the rich got richer, and everybody else pretty much got screwed. So I'm behind Mr. Musk and Donald Trump. I say we have to be honest and open and transparent about money and the federal government, and I'm all for debt ceilings and putting this out into the open where people can discuss it. All right, that's all I got to say. Thank you.